and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree. Hi, if you're new here. So today I am going to kind of continue a discussion I started last week on my channel where I talked about 7 tropes that I absolutely love in fantasy books. And today I'm doing the opposite and talking about 5 tropes that I hate in fantasy books. So hear me out. Obviously, some of these might be unpopular opinions, but I feel like a lot of people like to hear this kind of stuff. And some of the ones that I'm going to talk about in this video are relatively common unpopular opinions. Most of the time when we hear these tropes being used, a lot of people complain about them. So there might not be anything that shocks you, but alas, these are ones that I don't enjoy. So let's jump into it. Okay, so the first one that I'm starting off with, and we're coming at it with a bang because it is, I think, one of the most debatable and least favorite trope that people to this day still use, and that's InstaLove. What I think about the appeal with InstaLove is that when you're younger and you're like 10 to 15, InstaLove is just so compelling. I mean, back when we were like preteens and barely teenagers, we had so many emotions running through our heads and our bodies, and things were changing and things were happening that InstaLove felt probably very real for you. And I know, like, when I think about back when I dated kids for 2 weeks and I was so in love with them, I think we can all say that we've been there, especially like that middle grade, almost teenage age. Like from 7th through like 10th grade, if you didn't love someone and you were dating them for 2 weeks and all you did was see each other in school every day, did you really experience love? Did you? But my point is I do understand why the appeal of writers to write InstaLove in their stories is so great, because there are going to be actual kids and teenagers who will enjoy it. Myself as an adult, and honestly even when I was an older teen reading YA, in general, InstaLove just doesn't fly for me. I know at this point in my life that love and relationships are pretty complex and they take time and effort, and you can definitely know pretty early on if you think you're falling in love with someone, but it's still messy and unsure and you're still figuring things out. Like I know that there's a good chance, like between the first couple months of a relationship, that you will love someone. I have no doubt in my mind. And there's even an inkling too where I would, about a month in a relationship even, you probably can start feeling those inklings of whether you're really connecting to someone, especially if you're spending a lot of time with them. But you're still going to have to grow and learn. And it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows during those few months as you get to know each other. And I think that's why I have such a hard time with InstaLove in books, because typically it's like they know each other for a week, and especially in young adult books, it's like such a very, very short time. And in that time, they're not spending every waking hour with them. Now, if you gave me like a young adult where, you know, you were like sequestered in a ship and you couldn't leave the ship for the entirety of the novel, and the novel takes place over 2 weeks and you were like almost about to die and there was all these circumstances, you might be able to sell me an InstaLove. But at the same time, like, I know that sequel, if they got off the ship and they survived, the sequel should have a lot of issues in their relationship, because it wasn't like you were in a life or death situation. And when you're in life or death situations and you're in close quarters and there's all these issues, right? You're going to have a lot of high emotions, and that makes sense. On a psychology level, it makes sense to me. That's fine. But it's when it continues and we live happily ever after and there's no issues in the relationship, that you're like, right, you instantly loved them and now you're happy. That's it. That's where I draw the line. So for the most part, and I do see this sometimes in adult novels, but not nearly as much. I do think it's a little bit more complex. So the only thing that I ask regarding romance in fantasy is that you just make it believable. If they're on a quest for 4 months and they're stuck together, I can believe you falling in love with someone, sure. Throw a little bit of like frenemies to lovers, friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, any of that in there too. Okay, that's spicy, sure. But it's just when you just give me like, we just met and now I can't take my eyes off him, it doesn't sell it for me. The one series that I can say that I enjoyed thoroughly, but I still didn't like this element, was the Caravel series. It was very Insta-lovey, and the biggest part that my issue was is during Caravel, the two people who are falling in love with each other are barely on the page, and it's like this really big like fake out sometimes. So it was just almost like, I think this was only 3 nights and they're in love now. I was just very confused the entire time. So even though I did enjoy the book, like I almost couldn't finish it because of that element. So just throwing that out there. Going along with InstaLove, I feel like this is the other one that people like just hate, and I'm not sure why it's still used, but maybe there are lovers of this trope out there. And that's miscommunication. When you have people who just won't communicate with each other, and that is stringing the plot along, ugh, my soul ignites on fire in a blaze to crumble and turn me into ashes and never to be revived again. I hate it so much. For me, as a therapist, and maybe that's why I hate it, I just don't understand how people can go on for so long without communicating. It irks me. I mean, I teach people skills how to communicate all the time, and because communication is key. And sure, I'm going to have days as a human where I might not say something, or I'm expecting someone to read my mind. Those happen, but for an entire length of a novel, and whether that's like days or weeks or months or years, sometimes in novels where miscommunication continues, how do I, if you were real life, if the books were real life, I would think like, how do you survive? How do you survive without talking to people? Talk to people properly. So in fantasy in particular, I do find this frustrating in like contemporary novels, but in fantasy, I think it infuriates me more because in fantasy, like you have so much going on. Like how can you not tell people that things are happening? Like for instance, and I'm not saying anything in particular, but if you were like, I have this magic power and I don't know if I should let anyone know it. In real life, like I'm telling everyone. Okay, maybe not everyone, but like you for sure, like my husband and my best friend, they're all knowing now that I have this magic power, or I found this dragon egg that no one else has seen. Like how would you be able to contain that? Like unless like, for me, like I think like I wouldn't, unless there was like actual, like if this happens, you are going to die immediately. Save for that, I don't think that there would be anything stopping me from telling at least someone to talk it over. So yeah, I just feel like it's a weak plot line. And again, occasionally miscommunication, like in small bursts in a novel or in a series overall, can work. They're effective for a small issue in a plot. But if it's the overall thing, it just seems weak and uninventive, typically. Another one of a trope, and and I don't know, it's not like necessarily like a theme or anything of books, but it's just a specific thing that happens in fantasy novels. And I've seen it more and more, especially in young adult. And I don't know why, but it bothers me to no end. And that is when people give like pet names or nicknames to people they just meet. And I know that a lot of times it's done because you want like, you know, especially between men and women, like you have like a male who will like call like with the women like sweet or, you know, kitty cat or whatever, like these like names to irk the woman, like they're doing it on purpose. But like for me, it's just not cute. Like you're annoying the shit out of me and I want to smack you. Stop calling her this. And obviously the main characters are typically annoyed with it as well, and I think that's why I get so annoyed. It's because like just be a decent human being and stop calling her this, because clearly she doesn't want this. So that really bothers me a lot. I've actually been reading a mystery novel, and the main character has been, or the love interest has been saying sweetheart, and I'm like, there's just like this pang in my like chest where it's like, oh god, did someone stab me? Like I don't know why I hate it, but I just had to, you know, like I have to suppress the urge to vomit every time they say it. And again, it's because it sounds so demeaning. And nicknames and pet names in of themselves aren't bad. I mean, people use them all the time, and it can be very cute and pleasant. And I have in one of my own novels where a friend has a nickname for someone else, and it's really cute. It's just the tone of how they use it. And typically in fantasy, when you have either a love interest or a male who is like haughty and like over the top, and they're trying to like be better than the main character, they come off as douchebags when they're using these pet names, because they're douchebags essentially. And that's why it bothers me. Like if you were being really friendly, or you were friends and you had a long history and that was like a joke you had, sure, that would work. I just, for whatever reason, I just feel like you are a scumbag if you're demeaning a woman by calling her a pet name, especially if she doesn't like it. That was a rant, I know. But I do see this a lot in fantasy, so I had to put it on this list, even though it's not a big trope. It's like a small thing in a book usually, but it usually bothers me to no end. So you will not see that unless, well, maybe, I don't know. I can't say that I haven't done this, but I didn't do it as a male to a female. If that makes it better, I don't know. I don't know. I'll have to ask other people how they think about this. What do you guys think of this one? I mean, does it make it different if a male, would you be irked more if a male does it to a female, or like a male in general is the one doing it versus a female doing it to anyone else? Or would it be anyone? Like if, no matter who it was, if you were like personally calling nicknames or pet names to get a rise out of someone in some way, would that irk you? Let me know down below. I'm just thinking, the person that I'm thinking of that does kind of like call people pet names and nicknames, she is the villain. And that is kind of like her demeanor of like that she does. Like she is better than everyone in her opinion. And she does it to degrade people on purpose. So would that make it better? Like if you purposely know that she is doing this for a reason versus doing it as, you're calling someone that because like you're like kind of have this persona, but eventually they're going to fall in love. I think that's why it makes me mad in most fantasy, especially young adult fantasies, is because like it starts as like this is their way of being enemies, but eventually they turn into lovers. I think I made my point clear now. Let me know if I didn't clarify that. And if you need more clarification, let me know down below in the comments and we could chat it out. I'm going to move on before this like takes a whole new level and we have a whole nother video on our hands. The fourth on this list that I absolutely hate is probably one of the biggest ones for me. And that is when an author creates a magic system and there are obvious plot holes in that magic system. I'm a writer and I know sometimes you cannot seal every single crevice of a magic system because you're human and you're creating something out of nothing, and that's hard. Like you're not going to be able to. My issue is when you're reading it over and you're editing things and you have this magic system that works really well, but then something happens and you don't explain it. Or like you set up this magic system and then something else happens in the story and you're kind of like, well, that kind of goes against what you already established, and then you don't say anything else about it. Like you're just supposed to accept it. That's when I don't like it. I read a book recently where I said like the only weak point I thought that happened in the novel was with the magic system, where they just didn't explain like do they siphon the magic, or is it just like, that they just take it and no one knows no one's wise about it. It's just like, oh yeah, free magic energy, here we go. It was just kind of a gray area, and that was the only thing that kind of bothered me, is because I was like, you have a really interesting magic system, but there doesn't seem like any cause and effect with it. And I think that's bothers me, because personally I like very black and white, not quite black and white, but black and white in the sense that, you have magic and it has its limits. I think that's where I'm getting at, is that magic with limits makes sense to me. Unlimitless magic is like a foreign concept. Like who actually has that? I mean, nothing is unlimited in this world, right? So that's kind of where my brain goes. Like the science part of me is like, but no, this can't be real, even if it's magical. So I just think when there are these very glaringly open plot holes, it's kind of like, how haven't you been able to address this? Or like, did no beta readers catch it? Did no alpha readers catch it? Did no critique partners, agent editors, etc.? Or, I mean, was it just truly like that I'm just looking into it too much? Because that could be it. I could be a very critical reader, so when I read things and I think they're a plot hole, someone else might just be like, oh, I didn't even think about that at all. So that's probably why it's one of my biggest issues, is because I like fine-tooth comb through magic systems because I find them so fascinating and I want them always to be so good. And sometimes you just have to kind of take it at surface level. Like, it is what it is, and I have a hard time doing that, I know. The fifth and final trope that I want to talk about that I really don't like in my fantasy books is when you have a very like pretty happy ending if everything leading up to this ending didn't warrant that. So what I mean by this is, like, for instance, I mean, war in fantasy novels is such a common theme, and there's always people fighting, right? That's a big theme, and I almost don't know any high fantasy books that don't have some war element in it. So if you're having like a big war and you're leading up to this and leading up to this, and like maybe book 3 is when the war is actually happening now, and then at the end of the book, like all your main characters are happy and like free of injuries and like everything's like resolved and we're all getting married, and it just seems so unrealistic. I mean, people in wars all the time, like things happen. Like they're not, like even if you're not like physically injured, you could be psychologically and emotionally damaged, and you know, you can have like, you could be fine, but your best friend or your lover or etc. can be injured, and it just seems so unrealistic when nothing bad happens, which is why like I always commend J.K. Rowling for her big battle in her series, the Harry Potter series, because there were a lot of deaths, and a lot of deaths that, yeah, so maybe the Golden Trio didn't die, but you had a lot of people who died in that series that a lot of fans absolutely loved, and they hurt when those characters died. So I think it's natural. Like, sure, you're gonna hurt us as readers, but it makes sense. And I think in all, like even if you take the war aspect out, if you have like a gruesome, gritty world and things aren't kosher and they're not always happy, it just doesn't make sense that every single thing is wrapped up and beautiful. One of the things when I talked about my discussion on trauma in the Hunger Games, one of the reasons I ended up loving and re-rating Mockingjay 5 stars was because the ending was so realistic. It was happy, but it wasn't happy. Like they kind of got like, if you took out all of the dystopian elements, they got a happy ending. They lived together, they grew up, had kids, and they lived in a world without the Hunger Games. But they weren't fully happy. Katniss and Peeta had so much psychological trauma that they were dealing with, and being afraid of raising kids, and what happens if if the Hunger Games suddenly come up again, and there's all these fears and worries that were going through their head, that it makes sense to me that, yeah, like, yeah, and on the surface they're happy, but there's so much deep down in their souls and their hearts and their minds that aren't going to be fully okay. And that ending blew me away. I just thought, yes, this makes sense to me. So when you have all this stuff happening, and then you have everyone's coupled together and everyone's happy and no one is sad anymore, and no one has any kind of trauma or whiplash or anything of the nature, I just kind of have to scratch my head and go, really? Like I said, I'm not sadistic. I don't want my favorite characters to die necessarily, but I just feel like it's unrealistic to have every single thing wrap up and be pleasant. And maybe that's just me because I like gritty every now and then. But for the most part, I think, you know, if a book is supposed to be happy, or like if it's like a contemporary, I can see happy endings happening much more often. And there have been fantasy books where things got wrapped up and it made sense and I enjoyed it. That does happen too. As long as you can have a good explanation from how we got from point A to the end point B, I'm fine with it. So there you have it. Those are all the tropes that I absolutely hate in fantasy. Let me know down below if you agree with any of these, or if you have others that you would also add to the list. And until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.